Hi, everybody. I'm Jeremy from the Generational Exchange. Are you doing everything in your power to create the very best, positive, outstanding, motivating culture that you possibly can in your office today? I'll bet you're not. Today on the Generational Exchange, we're going to dive deep into the strategies, challenges, and best practices for cultivating that culture that you and your employees can be proud of. See you soon.
I'm Chris Terranova, and this is the Generational Exchange. 4 generations, 1 conversation. The business world is a tapestry woven from different threads. The experience of seasoned veterans, the tech-savvy energy of the younger generation, and everything in between. And this podcast will unravel those threads, exploring the unique perspectives from panelists in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s on today's business challenges. By bringing together these unique voices, we hope to spark new ideas, bridge the generation gap, and equip listeners with a well-rounded approach to navigating the ever-evolving business landscape. Oh boy, fellas, we're back. Been a little while since we were in the saddle. It's exciting to see everybody. Let me start by introducing the panel as usual. Let me start going around my screen. I'm going to start with the lovely and talented Mark Russell, who is representing someone in their 60s. Good evening, my friend.
Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on when you're listening.
That's right. Or good afternoon. We'll take all comers at this point, right? And as someone in their 40s and our amateur firefighter is the lovely and talented Jeremy Davidson. Hi, Jeremy.
Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Indeed. Glad you could make it. And last but certainly not least, we have Rhett Suchu representing someone in their 30s. Good evening, sir.
Hello, sir. And my problem is house water. So we have the full spectrum. We have the full spectrum here. Yes.
Hopefully no fires coming nearby.
No.
And as always, I'm Chris Terranova representing someone in their 50s. All right, so now that we got all the introductions out of the way, let's talk about what we're going to be discussing on today's podcast. So today we will be exploring the critical role of employee engagement, in fostering a thriving workplace. In today's fast-paced business environment, retaining top talent and driving organizational success hinges on a deeply engaged workforce. We're going to delve into the strategies, challenges, and best practices for cultivating a culture where employees feel valued, motivated, and even connected to their work. Together, we're going to unlock the secrets of building a high-performing and highly engaged team. So we're going to start with a little data from our friends at Gallup. And Mark, I'm going to ask you to weigh in here once we get through this beginning part. But recent data and analysis from Gallup highlights that various conflicting data or gaps in employee engagement. This overview will explore how to close the gap between perception and reality in employee engagement. What you believe you are delivering may not align with what your employees are experiencing. Data supports this disconnect, highlighting the need for a closer look at engagement practices. Employee engagement presents great opportunities for both individuals and companies to prosper. So, Mark, talk a little bit about that, right? You kind of put that in there. You're a big fan of Gallup. Can you talk a little bit about it? And then we'll go into some percentages as well, but just speak to that point in general.
Yeah, Chris, thanks. And I think, again, like everything else, these are snapshots in time. So Gallup does a worldwide workforce report annually every year, and it usually comes out around in the April-May timeframe from the previous year. One of the things that they'll do is they'll not only break out regionalities of around the world, then also focus on like the US and Canada. US numbers tend to be better than some other parts of the world. Some of the numbers that really stood out is that only 1/3 of all the employees say that they're actively engaged or they're engaged at work. And in some of the cases where we see some disconnects is when another interesting poll that Gallup did kind of in conjunction with it, but not solely a part of that, is that they interviewed a little over 12,500 employees. They interviewed 2,700 managers. And one statistic that stood out was like 60% of all managers think that they give weekly recognition. Yet at the same time, only 35% of those individual contributors or of the employees say that they receive weekly information. So I think in your intro, that's one of the little gap areas that we look. Now, as we all know in business, the truth probably lies a little bit closer in the middle. Yet at the same time, it does bode the question if only 1/3 of people are saying they're engaged or actively engaged, and if there's a 25% gap wrapped around, am I receiving recognition or not? Those are the things that I think we can explore today. And that, frankly, I spent a lot of my work doing focused on employee engagement. So that's a little bit of the background behind of what we're looking at. And oh, and by the way, if you want to look at the glass half empty, that means that 67% of all employees are either disengaged or actively disengaged, which means I'm looking for a new job. And that was another Gallup report that just came out a couple of weeks ago, that 51% of all respondents said that they're either actively or they are open to looking for new opportunities if they come their way.
Mark, before we dive into kind of how to focus on this, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot a little bit, but do you have a sense of what is driving this? Like what's the kind of behind the scenes that's causing the disengagement? Do you have any sense of that?
I think if we look at things from a generational perspective, and this is where I'll look to my distinguished colleagues here, starting with Rhett from the Gen Zs, is that a lot of folks in the Gen Z category will say, if I'm not aligned with the values of the company, maybe I hired on thinking I was going to have alignment. Number two, I'm not getting any level of professional development. Number three, my work doesn't have meaning for what I want to accomplish in my life and in my career. That's a key indicator of why there is this disconnect. For baby boomer generation, and this is all well known, we were the generation that felt like we were lucky to have a job because that's what we were told. So we're more likely to just remain. And candidly, I heard in one of the Gallup conferences that I attended, a lot of the millennials were somewhat tongue-in-cheek complaining that the boomers aren't retiring, so I don't have a path to management. And so I think, again, when we look at it from a generational perspective, there are different things that if you are a boomer or an older millennial in a management position, or even a younger millennial, you've got to be sensitive and aware of this is what people are talking about and this is what they're feeling. And if I can't be, and I don't want to say sensitive to your feelings, but yet demonstrate a concern and an empathy for where you're coming from so I can keep you engaged, you're going to be gone. And there was also another statistic that I read from McKinsey that said the average cost to replace a manager is 80% of their salary. And for an individual contributor, it's 40% of their salary. And that's on an annual basis. So if I have a 100-person company and I have 20% attrition, and you can do the math. If my average salary is $60,000, now all of a sudden I've got to budget $45,000 for each individual contributor it's going to leave, because that's what it's going to cost me to hire someone, train someone, get them to a level of competency. So I guess on one hand, if you can't tell, this is why I'm really passionate about this particular topic.
That's good. It only took 13 episodes to get there, but I think that's wonderful.
Finally.
I think that's really good insight. And maybe if you guys are okay with it, we're kind of spitballing a little bit here, but I think this is interesting. Mark, you talked about that in the macro and from a boomer, but I want to start with you, and then I'm going to go. I'd like Jeremy to go and then Rhett to go. Like, what is your expectations about engagement, and has it changed? So I have my thoughts, but Mark, I'd like to get yours, especially since you've kind of been through the work life and you're kind of on the other side of it in a way. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, how did that, from that expectation of just having a job to where you kind of ended, or where you even are now with your own company, what does that look like to you?
Well, I guess on one hand, I was always very fortunate that I worked with a lot of good companies and, like everything else, strong managers, right? Yes, there were the occasional one or two that I just didn't connect with, but I think what they did is they instilled a sense of, and we're going to talk about this a little, how can I help you be successful? They were a mentor to me. It wasn't, most of my career was in sales and business development and revenue generating roles or revenue retention roles. It was easy to say, hey, you're only 50% of your goal. We're halfway through the year. You got to step it up, right? No, from their perspective, it's more about how can I help you be successful? Let's look at some of the behavioral things. Let me show a genuine interest of what you do and how you're approaching it, and then see how we can tweak it. And so, again, I think today, even as I do my mentoring or being fortunate to build out a training and development team a few years ago, I spent a lot of investment in hiring the right people. The last thing I wanted to do was to lose anyone, right? Now, one person left because it was the best thing for our organization, that they went into a better role for them to support our customers. But everyone else, I needed to keep them. I wanted to keep them. I wanted to see them grow, even though my goal was to say, hopefully I have you for a couple of years and then you're going to go on and do much better things, right? And so I think that's part of that mindset. And so how it's changed over the years is just the fact that you want to get people excited about what they do. You want them to feel passionate. You want them to be part of the team. And when you do that, then you have great retention and engagement. And that is a direct reflection on how they treat your customers. If I'm having a bad month, I'm probably not treating my coworkers very well, but that also is going to portray over to the customers. Yeah. And then that's where you lose customers. And guess what? When you lose customers, you lose revenue. And when you lose revenue, bad things happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. I can say maybe from a Gen X perspective, right? I came into working probably not as like this is the forever job. You kind of go to your work and this is it forever. But the expectations were very low, especially in the early part of my career. I was fortunate to start in a management position fairly young, but the expectation was you should be lucky you have this, not that they were lucky to have me, right? So it was always this, it started this fear-based success cycle for me. And Jeremy, you and I have talked about this a lot, right? Where I was always moving forward based on fear rather than being engaged with the company or feeling like it was reward-based. It was more fear-based. But as I've gotten older and moved into leadership, and especially with some of the higher positions that I've had, I've really looked at how would I want to be spoken to? How would I want to have engagement? And it made me rethink, like, what do I expect as an employee from my employer, right? And one of the questions I've started asking as I looked for a new position was, tell me about your culture. Tell me about your work-life balance. Tell me about those things that engage me. What is your expectations? I would have never asked those questions 10 years ago, right? I'm not even sure I would have asked them 5 years ago. So my engagement has changed as I've learned about engagement. My expectations for my own engagement have shifted as well. Jeremy, what's your thoughts on that from your perspective?
I like where you were coming from with that. I'll apologize. My first time talking. Chris wasn't being facetious. I actually was fighting an actual fire, not one of our CS fires. So I'm a little bit hoarse today, I think, from the smoke. You know, as we were going through the conversation, I think what resonated with me there that you said was you try to be the manager that you always wanted. And we've talked about that quite a bit, right? You've got good bosses, you got bad bosses, and hopefully you pick up all the good stuff along the way and you combine it into something. If I'm given the opportunity to lead people, this is the type of leader I want to be. And not to segue too much into the focus area for today's chat, but looking at those pillars, the psychological safety, candid communication, curiosity, everybody's involved. That's kind of the essence of what, at least from my perspective, what you strive to be as a people leader. Where I've been struggling as of late is how to tease those elements out of your leadership, right? Is it in fact a two-way street, right? Like, I've always kind of taken the approach you can control the things you can control, and I can control what kind of leader I am with my folks. I can control what kind of employee I am to the company. I can't control how somebody else behaves or responds or interacts or leads. But the one thing that I like that you do exceptionally well, I think, is coaching up, right? When you see something in your professional environment that's not on par with what your expectations for reasonableness are, you've never been shy about sharing that and saying, hey, I think we could do this better. And that's something I hope to take as a page out of your book into my professional journey. So.
Yeah, I think we've all learned together as we've done that, right? So I think having that be received well by people around me helped me continue to be, going back to one of our earlier podcasts, to be brave, right? And speak up. Rhett, what's your perspective? You've worked in small companies, big companies. What's your expectations for engagement, or how does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean it's very interesting for me because a lot of my mentors and my parents and my grandparents and such, they were part of some of these work cultures where it was like you were a company man or woman. You joined a company, you worked with them, they took care of you, you took care of them, all of that. And to a degree, I think that still exists for certain companies and you can have a long tenure. But we've also, with all of the social media and everything is now public, we've also seen the other side of it where the CEO gets on a Google meeting with 1,600 employees and says, all right, you're all done as of today. And no one knew about it. No one was warned about it. Now they're out in the job market. And so I think from a employee side, what I've done really well at is understanding what the level of commitment is and should be for what you need to the company. Do you need someone that's 120% in there jumping with both feet? You got it. As long as you're fulfilling my needs, I'll fulfill yours type of thing. But, or do you just need someone who's going to push the buttons, just go through the motions type of thing, and understanding and aligning in that way, I think can really help sometimes with, I've seen burnout with colleagues and some of my friends and such, where maybe they want to give 150% to a company or something, but that company's not ready for it, or they're not on the same wavelength, whatever that may be. From an employer and kind of manager standpoint, I'm always looking to fulfill the needs and create the best environment for my employees because that's what's expected nowadays. As Mark was kind of saying, work-life balance, it's a term. It is part of the workplace now. You have to look at that seriously and consider what your employees need to be able to work at their best and give that effort. So I think I've kind of had a unique journey of understanding both sides and being able to do both, but where it fits best can sometimes be an interesting thing to figure out, right?
Yeah, I think it's finding it, right? And I think to give your generation, since we're a generational podcast, some credit, I think you've re-looked at, and really, I think it started to change with my generation. It got stronger with the last generation, then really with maybe even your generation and the generation behind you. It's like we're not going to accept just being beaten into the ground, or we have to work here because we have a job, right? There's expectations and it becomes bi-directional. There's always give and take, right? But I think I've taken a page out of that where I've learned too to set boundaries and expectations and say, this is my love language, for lack of a better term, right? And be clear on what engagement means to me, right? So as we're going through these items, and we're going to be talking about some best practices, and Jeremy alluded to the pillars here a little bit ago, be thinking about that as you're going through and listening to the podcast. What are those things meaning to you, and are you articulating them? Are they being fulfilled? I was just talking to my son today, and I said one of the things that I've gotten much better about is saying I like or don't like this, or please speak to me this way, or please don't speak to me this way, instead of swallowing it. 15 years ago, I would have just swallowed it. Went, oh well, at least I'm employed. And I was like, yeah, no, let's make this again a bi-directional relationship, right? So I think it's really interesting to see everybody's perspective of what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Chris, one more thing I think
Please,
there
yeah.
to that point I was kind of making about how you can be seemingly laid off so easily is I think you have a lot more employees going in where they're trying to protect themselves a little bit too, where they're saying like, however much commitment and involvement you show towards me as a company is what I'm going to show towards you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big part of why this conversation is important, especially for companies, because I mean, and maybe you guys can tell me if I'm kind of wrong here, but like in the last 10 years, I think we've seen a real shift of where companies are kind of concerned that their employees are going to leave much more so than they used to be, because I think enough people got burned and fired maybe where they were just like, I'm going to be here for the good of me and what I'm going to do here, and then I'm going to leave when I want. unless you take those extra steps, you
Right.
know?
And I think it's interesting too to that point, and I promise we'll get to the
Yes.
pillars here in just a second.
Yes.
But I think it's interesting to that point is there is this expectation. You hear leaders in companies going, no one cares. They quiet quit, they just drop the job. But again, it's because you're not fulfilling needs. It has to, I'm going to say it again, it has to be bi-directional. So if you're a leader of a company, are you giving people a reason to stay? Your widget is not the main reason why they stay, right? Yes, there are, and we've all been fortunate enough to work in these places. There are mission-driven companies, right, where that does help, but that doesn't change the engagement level if you're not connected as a leadership team. So I think that's something to think about. And from an employee standpoint, you got to put in a little bit to get some out too. It's not you show up and everybody gets a participation ribbon, right? I think there has to be also some, hey, you got to put a little in here for us to invest in you. So again, I think it's a
Right.
bi-directional. That's an excellent point, Chris, because the only arrow I would throw at your one comment, Red, is even though companies may be aware of it, I don't think they're taking enough action, or else why are 51% of all employees saying, I'll either entertain leaving or I'd be open for other opportunities?
Sure.
I mean, or I'm either actively looking or I'm open to take another opportunity. So again, it may be lip service, but where's the rubber hitting the road, as they would say.
Exactly right. All right,
Mark,
so
I think
go ahead, Jeremy. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. The one takeaway I had from your stats, Mark, though, is that there's a financial incentive for companies to deal with bad managers. Yes, it costs 30% more to backfill for a manager you've let go than an individual contributor. But if that manager is overseeing a team of 150, 300, and you've got 10, 15, 20% attrition rate, what is that, or higher, right? What is that poor manager costing your business, right? Regardless of what they're producing. If it's creating a culture that's not conducive for the folks that are doing the day-to-day grind work to be engaged and safe and curious and contributing. We'll toss the pillars back out one more time before we jump into them. I don't think enough businesses pay attention to the financial incentive around maintaining that good leadership structure, right? What's the old cliche? People don't quit businesses, they quit bad managers. So I don't know. I thought your stats kind of jumped out at me there. That and the other one you had there on Gallup, where was it 60% of managers feel like they're doing a great job recognizing individual contributors and their contributions to the team, but only 35% of folks feel like they're being appropriately recognized.
Yeah.
That's the segment that matters, right? Shoot, I would never survey all my leaders and say, hey, do you guys think you do a good job recognizing people? I'd survey the people they're managing. Hey, are you being recognized? So I don't know. I liked what you tossed in there. I thought that was great.
Thanks. And just to validate again, you guys heard this from me 4 years ago, 3 years ago. 70% of all employees will say their manager has a direct impact on their level of engagement. So I may love my company's mission, I may love the values, I may love the people I work with, but 70% feel that their manager has a direct impact as to their level of engagement. So enough of the stats.
No, I think and you know what, every week, guys, we always say, are we going to have enough to talk about? Clearly, right? We never have to worry about that. But let's talk about those pillars. So again, when we talk about best practices, they're kind of wrapped around what we would consider 4 pillars. The first one is psychological safety. The second one is constant and candid communications. The third one is authentic curiosity. And the fourth one is everyone gets to contribute. We're going to break these down a little bit and go into them with a little bit of detail. And let's start with psychological safety. So just defining that quickly, when you're talking about fostering employee engagement, it's important to foster or establish a culture of psychological safety. And this really consists of 4 stages that build on to the other elements that we've talked about. It really is imperative that each of these pieces in this stage, in the psychological safety, get attention and get looked at. So we're going to dive into those. But I want to say before I go into those, psychological safety as a term, as a way of talking, is a relatively new thing for me. I actually really like this, and we talked a little bit about it on one of our earlier podcasts with Eva Murphy. which if you haven't listened to that podcast, it's great, by the way. But we talked a little bit about that, about having that psychological safety. But Mark, you and I being kind of the older folks on the call, that's a fairly new term for you too, yeah?
Absolutely. Because again, I think it just shifts the paradigm that instead of giving everyone that sense of belonging and respect, there was always hey, this is how we're going to do it. If you want to be on board, great. If you don't want to be on board, then good luck in your next position. And again, that's probably, there are times where maybe that has to be, like if I was in a military type of role and I'm taking orders and this is what we're going to do, it's all about military discipline, execution, chain of command. But when you're in business, the other 90% of the time, it's a different way of having to look at it, and just be aware. You don't have to agree 100% with it. And there may be times where maybe you're even uncomfortable offering some of that, but just be aware that this is what's going to drive half of the workforce. So if I'm going to poo-poo it more or less, then I've lost half my workforce.
Right. So let me talk about the 4 stages and then, or the 4 parts of this, and then I'd like to get everybody's thoughts around it. The first one is inclusion. Employees must feel respected, valued, and able to bring their authentic selves to work. A sense of belonging is crucial for fostering trust and open communication. And kind of like we say this on every one of our podcasts, some of the stuff sounds so common sensical, that's a word. But if it was, we wouldn't be talking about it. If it was, we wouldn't have all of those percentages that you were listing, Mark. So being aware, do people feel like they have a sense of belonging in your organization? The second one is learner safety, which encourages individuals to embrace growth and development. When employees feel comfortable taking risks and making mistakes, they will innovate and thrive in creativity. The third one is contributor safety, which empowers employees to share ideas and contribute meaningfully to the team. By valuing input and recognizing contributions, organizations foster a sense of ownership and engagement. And finally, challenger safety. This creates a space where employees feel comfortable questioning the status quo and offering constructive criticism. This environment drives innovation and continuous improvement. So again, I want all your thoughts. You can talk to the whole thing, individual parts, but Jeremy, I'm going to start with you on this. Kind of what's your read on that, and what's your experience with it?
Yeah, I have to decide how much or how little I want to share here. But I've had some great leaders in the past, and I've had some that have completely left me with PTSD. So the psychological safety one, I think, is no, not Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll turn my mic off.
I think the psychological, and we're not talking about safe spaces here. We're talking about, and I think this is the predecessor for all the other 3, right? If you don't have the psychological safety, are you going to step up and contribute? Are you going to offer up your ideas? Are you going to question things? For me, one of the first things I do within the first couple of days, if not week, of starting a new role is pull up with my team and say, hey, you guys need to know I'm going to be as transparent with you as I can. If there's a problem, I'm going to pull you aside and we're going to talk about it and we're going to deal with it. I said, nothing's ever going to be a surprise, right? And for me, at least with my teams, that's the way I like to preface things. Like, hey, if there's an issue, we'll talk about it. If you're having an issue, I hope you'll bring it to me and we'll talk about it. But we're not going to have any surprises. I'm not going to pull you into a room one day and say, hey, sorry, this isn't working out. You're not cutting it. Like, we will have had that conversation, long in advance of that. And for me, that's what I want from a leader, right? Chris and I used to disagree vehemently around things like budget, right? Especially for me at the time, kind of being a newer manager. I'm like, I've got awesome rock stars on my team. I want to give them all big raises. I want to give them stipends. Let's get them to where they should be in the market, because we're underpaying them. And being able to have that back and forth and say, okay, here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do. Here's what we've got in terms of revenue. Here's what we don't have in terms of revenue. And we can't make everything happen. Like, it was a learning experience for me. But if you didn't have that safety to be able to challenge and say, hey, this is what I'm advocating for my team, and have somebody actually hear me and listen to me and respond back with either awesome or here's why we can't do everything on this list, that helped me grow as a manager. I guarantee you, if I didn't trust Chris, we wouldn't have had that argument, because I don't know how he would have taken it. How does a manager take you pushing back on something? I don't know. This has been a topic as of late with a couple of us, right? You and I have talked about this. Chris and I have talked about this. Chris, I think you've got some great examples of stepping into a new role and helping kind of foster and build that. I'm going to interchange psychological safety and trust here, but to try to build that trust as you're starting out. I don't know. Is there anything there you can share with the broader audience?
Yeah, I think in my new role, I feel like I'm getting to an opportunity again when we talk about meeting my needs for in engagement. My new role does all of this for me, right? I've had to go through all of this where I've had to contribute, I've had to challenge, I've had to be included, I'm trying to learn new things because it's a brand new product, right? I've gotten to do that. And for my team, I think very quickly we established, like I always say, this is Las Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but I need to understand what's going on in order to help improve it. And there was a rapport there that very early on, and again, it's early days. I've been here less than 90 days, but right away there was a trust to say, I'm gonna throw this rope. If you catch it and don't choke me with it, I'll keep telling you what's going on. But if I find out you're using this against me, I will never trust you again. And so far that's held true. And it's been really interesting to see that develop. And it's built a very quick rapport. We all feel very comfortable with each other. And it's expanding that circle to make sure that everybody feels that way. We just had a conversation today where when we talk about challenging, I had to challenge about having skip levels. I wanted to have skip levels, and some people didn't think they were necessary. But I said, I want those people to feel engaged with me and safe to tell me what's going on from their perspective, right? So building that in and allowing people to talk to me, to feel included, to feel like they can contribute. It's not always a norm, but you've got to be brave and strong and kind of show the value, right? So I feel like all of those things are happening in my new role, and it makes it really exciting for me. I like it. Makes me happy.
Maybe there's a whole self element to that too. I think we've all had folks that have worked for us that have lost parents, or gosh, I think we had lost a child, and they have monumental major things going on in their lives, and you never know what somebody's going through. I think having enough trust and safety in your team and your environment with your manager to be able to talk about those things. I mean, shoot, there's very few of us that get up every morning and go to work and are actually responsible for curing cancer. And I think when folks feel comfortable coming to you and saying, hey, maybe I've been a great individual contributor for the last 6 years, but I've got this monumental thing that's going on in my life right now. I need some space. I think that you get into those situations, and those are the folks that are sticking with companies and waiting for the next manager opportunity to open up, because that's where they want to work and that's where they want to aspire to grow their career. So I think there's a lot to that, but I appreciate your take on that. And I know you've fostered that give and take with your teams, Chris, too, in terms of, hey, what's going on in your world? Because if your world isn't operating at 100%, you're not going to be operating at 100%.
Right. We just had that conversation today about letting me know if the water is above your nose. Like if you can't breathe, you got to raise your hand and be honest and transparent about it. And I have to say, and this isn't a plug for my boss, but my boss makes me feel like psychological safety, that's number one on the list. Like I feel very protected, and it's always respectful when there's a challenge, but I feel like, no, challenge, it's okay. We've talked about this before. You always get a voice, you don't always get a vote. But I always feel like I have a voice and I can contribute to the vote. And in very early on, there's this challenge I'm expecting you to, and we're always doing it in a thoughtful and respectful way, of course. But it makes you feel like, oh, okay, it is okay. And you mentioned PTSD earlier, Jeremy. It's taking me some cycles to feel like I don't have to go back and apologize or double check. So we're okay. You're not mad at me because I told you what I thought. Because we have had that experience where we thought we were psychologically safe, or we had challenger safety, and we really didn't, did we?
No, that's right. That's right. And it trickles down from the top, right? Like I said, if you don't have that at the top levels of your company, that's gonna filter down through your ranks and affect everything that everybody does. And I like Mark's comment earlier too, because that really resonated with me. If you don't have happy employees, your employees aren't going to make your customers happy.
Yeah.
100% for leading teams that are always customer facing. I couldn't agree with that more.
No, that's right. Red, any thoughts on this?
Well, gosh, you guys kind of took all the good points possible.
Oh, there's plenty.
No, I would echo everything that you all have said. The only other angle I'd maybe add here for both people managers and companies to consider for this topic was if you want to get the most out of a team, right? It is important that you create this psychological safety because we're always pitching all of this diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And getting these different backgrounds and these different ideas and these different levels of thought. And the only way to allow those to work most effectively is if you're creating an environment where those are safe to use and come up with the best ideas and the where it didn't work for them in the past type of situation. And so that's kind of the first one is as far as performance, you want better performance, create a psychologically safe environment because you're going to find out a lot quicker what isn't working and what is, both from the employees of the bad managers and from the great managers who are noticing these team members that either need to stay a part of the team or move to a different team. Maybe it's not their calling, whatever it is, but having that open door allows you to get the best people and the best performance. And then the second part, I mean, it's just hopefully everyone, well, I guess not everyone that becomes a people manager necessarily has the best kind of ideals or goals in mind and why they're doing it. But part of why I became a people manager, at least, is to try and create that happy day and work environment and place for all your employees so that they can wake up and be excited about being part of this team. There are always going to be tough days. Those always come and go. But you want to be that manager that creates that and is able to Mark, it might have been before the show when we were talking, but my job as a manager is to make you become the best version of yourself, especially if that's going to be you passing me up one day and I'm working for you because I've been able to help you become such a great people manager or problem solver, whatever it is.
And we're all going to be working for Red someday.
I don't think so.
All right, let's move on.
That's
Let's move on to the
comment.
next pillar then. I think that was a really good point. Constant and candid communications. I think this is really important by fostering a workplace where open and honest communication is not just encouraged, but celebrated. It will break down barriers and build trust together. By creating a space where every voice is heard and valued, you unleash the power of open dialogue. Together, your team and organization can achieve extraordinary things through building a culture of honesty and transparency. It kind of makes me think of one of the things that we did really well at one of our previous companies was whenever we did a debrief on an issue, one of the things that was always at the very top is this is not a whodunit. This is not a finger pointing exercise. This is a debrief to figure out what we did, how we can do it better next time, and uncover those gaps. And I always appreciated that because I think it was truly genuine. It didn't always work. People's personalities get in the way, but for the most part, the intent was there. And I always respected that. And I've actually taken that through to when we do debriefs now, is saying kind of at the top, everybody needs to feel like they can contribute. And this isn't a witch hunt. We're not out to get you. We have to talk about what happened and how do we improve it. And the only way we can do that is to be honest and celebrate when people are honest instead of beating them up for it. Right. So Rhett, I'll start with you this time. What do you think on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is how you create highly functional and well-performing businesses, is that you have these avenues and these processes where you're identifying the problems and you're coming up with the solutions. And when you have those conversations, like you're talking about, where it becomes a finger pointing exercise or something, you're totally detracting from solving the actual problem. Most of the time, everyone is trying to do their best possible work, right? And it's not a matter of whether they're doing their best possible job, but are we providing the best environment and systems for them to use to be able to accomplish the goals we want to accomplish? And that gets totally lost in the wash if it becomes a finger pointing exercise. Along with that, the constant aspect of this, whenever I'm going to create a project or look at a new system or something like that, I'm always looking for what are the data points or the telltale signs that tell me which way the ship is going. I don't want to start a project and my first check-in is 6 months down the line. a lot happens in 6 months. I want to be looking at, okay, what are the regular conversations? What are the regular data points that we're looking at that can tell me? And I look at those as far as, to make it very simple, if these numbers are high, I know we need to address this here. If these numbers are low, I want to address it this way. And have those conversations so you can stay ahead of it and avoid a lot of the speed bumps.
Yeah. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, building off of what Rhett just kind of shared, I think the other element is keeping it clear, concise, and consistent. When people are hearing mixed messages, then all of a sudden that's where rumors begin. I told Rhett something, but if I didn't tell Jeremy and Chris the same thing, now all of a sudden, if I only told Jeremy half of what I told Rhett, well, Jeremy's going to start coming up with some of his own assumptions. And then next thing you know is it's going to be sharing, oh, well, Chris and I just had a casual conversation and, oh, well, this must be that then. And that's where rumors start. And that's candidly, that's number one driver of disengagement. I'm not going to engage because we're not getting clear, concise communications back and forth. And if anything, it kind of falls right back into that psychological safety of, do I have the opportunity to challenge, right? That challenger safety element. I remember there was a fellow, you and I had the same mentor, Chris, at E-College, the great Andy. And basically he'd start out a conversation with, hey, challenge me on this idea I have right now, which opened up the door right away. And then if I made some comments and some were good and then some were a learning opportunity for me, say, well, let me tell you a little bit more about the financials behind this. And so it just all ties together. And again, I'm all for that. There are certain things that you may not be privy to say, but you have to at least address that with, hey, there are some other things that I just can't share that you won't be aware of. And if you trust me, then we'll be able to continue to move forward. But if you don't have that layer of trust, then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, how can you tell if someone's lying? They open their mouth. So
Right. and I think you have to be able to give and receive, right? Like as a leader, you have to be able to be okay with receiving feedback that may not be what you expected or allows people to be candid. Like you guys make fun of me for it. I think I even have a mug that says it, but I picked this up from one of my bosses, Jacob, a long time ago. He would always say, keep me honest. Keep me honest. But, right? And I think you all say that in some form or fashion. Now, I think we've all picked it up over the years. That was truly the reason I picked it up was because he truly meant it. Keep me honest. If I'm off track or what I've extrapolated from this conversation isn't aligned, let's reset it so that I'm doing the best job on your behalf and the team is moving in the right direction. And that always stuck with me. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on this one?
let me just add real quick.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Mark. Go ahead, please.
It's not just about managers and leaders. There's an equal, I'll say, opportunity for individual contributors to address this because they're the ones that are coming and going quicker than people would probably prefer. So I think that there's kind of a shared responsibility to a point. And when you offer that psychological safety, then if something I'm saying is not resonating, I owe it to you, Chris, to say, gee, it's just not connected. I know you're 2 levels above me. I know we're doing this skip level, but I need to share this with you. So I think it is a two-way street because managers have a lot on their plates and trying to be a mind reader. And again, we talked about it in the pre-show. I've been blessed to be married to my bride for 42 years. And I always told her, tell me directly. I can't read your mind, can't read between the lines. If you don't tell me directly, I'm only going to disappoint you and bad things will happen. So again, I think there's a shared responsibility that employees do need to share these kind of conversations as well with their management team.
That's a fair point. That's right. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yes, Mark, my bride came home tonight glowing from ear to ear with this to-go box from a sushi restaurant in Boise. And it was tuna sashimi, and I don't really care for raw seared tuna. And I said, "Oh, you can have that." No, I got them for you. You love them, and I said, "Well, why do you think I love it?" Well, because you make it. And I said, "Well, I make it for you because you love it." Yeah.
Awesome and candid, right?
Chris, I like how you started out this segment. I've got a great customer escalation playbook that I created almost as a byproduct of that Red account program we built way back in the day.
Yeah.
And the first section and the whole thing leans into that. We're going to assume that everybody tackled their role in whatever this issue is that we're escalating with the best interest of the customer in mind and with the best interest of the company in mind, right? And if you take that approach, you take some of those assumptions out of play. I'll be quick on this one. I just wanted to call out, I think if you're able to foster that candid communication environment within your team, it can really be a game changer. I used to laugh. I had a frustrating employee early in my management career who ended up being one of my very best managers.
Jeremy, you don't have to. I mean, listen, that
He's
No.
He can hear you.
If he was on here today, he'd tell you that. I'll give a shout out to our good friend Tom, who I always affectionately referred to as my consummate devil's advocate, because I could hand him a new process and say, "Hey, we're thinking about rolling this out," and he'd punch holes in it 6 ways from Sunday, and it took a little while to get used to. And by the end of my tenure up there, I was grabbing stuff and tossing it to him and say, "Hey, punch a bunch of holes in this and get it back to me by Friday." It was a really valuable role, but
Yeah.
I don't know that we've all worked for managers all the time that have enough self-confidence or comfortability to be able to have somebody punching holes in their stuff all the time. So how do you, I guess that's really the question, right? How do you develop and embrace that culture? Because boy, it made things better. It was great to have that perspective of, you got to rein it in sometimes, but
yeah. Well, I think that's like Mark and Chris have both said, we're talking about the two-way street here, right? I don't know if we've had a segment that kind of directly relates to it. We probably have, but there is an art to being open with your manager. Your feedback should not be, "You're an idiot. This is an awful process." That's not going to go over well, whoever you're discussing it with. Okay, so
Delivery counts.
yes,
Delivery counts. But in all seriousness, Jeremy, you're pointing out like what you did for Tom and for many others, not just for Tom, but in that example was going back to our 4 pillars of our 4 stages of psychological safety. You created challenger safety. You said this is a space where I not only want you to, I expect you to poke holes in it. It's good, it's positive, it's not a negative thing. So you built that into your world. Again, before we really even had, I think before we had terms for it, we just did that because it was the right thing to do, because it made us better, right? And I love that there now is a challenger safety term. We can put a word or a saying around it or a nomenclature around it. But I like that a lot. Okay, let's move on to our next one, which is authentic curiosity. By demonstrating authentic curiosity, it's crucial to listen and understand before sharing your own ideas. Building off an idea instead of dismissing it fosters collaboration. Can alignment and commitment to the ultimate solution be achieved through this approach? I certainly think so. Stair-stepping a series of solutions towards the desired state might be the key. Questions always help shape when collaboration is involved. This is one of those things that I think I've had to learn, if I may jump, was I tend to think fast, and that's not an arrogant thing. I just do. I think fast, and when somebody starts to tell me something, I can already see most of the time to the end. One of the best things about being a remote worker was the mute button, right? Because my reaction is to jump in and solve, not because I'm trying to get ahead of you, but my brain's already processing that fast. So I've learned to mute myself. And the raise your hand feature on the meetings, when we started doing that, I'm telling you, that was more important for me than for anybody else. Because I know this is going to come as a surprise, but I have a strong personality and I can own a meeting if I want to. I know Rhett's making a face like, what? But I've had to learn that, to let them get the whole statement out and then be authentically curious about why they're driving towards that. And I think a lot of the things that, again, the criticisms, the so what's, the now what's, all of those things do come from trying to build authentic curiosity so you can get to that underlying piece. But Mark, maybe starting with you, what are your thoughts on this?
No, it's so critical. I think I heard from one CEO once that said, seldom is the first solution the best solution. And so between having that as an understanding of, hey, let me just throw this idea out and now let's work around it, that's a great way. For managers, it's having the patience to allow people to finish their thoughts and finish their sentences. Now, while other people may be impatient, and being a New York Italian and my driving habits might have a tendency of being impatient with others, I've really had to kind of learn in my business career, give people time to give their thoughts. One of the Gallup strengths is intellection. So if you have the strength of intellection, you need time to process and you're not immediately jumping in.
Right.
And even to that point, I had a couple folks on my team where I was like, hey, I'm either going to give them a couple days notice in advance of here's a topic I'd like you to think about. Or if we did happen to be a spur of the moment topic, I always wanted to go back to them a couple days later and say, tell me your thoughts about what we were chatting about. What do you think about this particular topic? So again, I think it's a two-way street. You have to have the right questioning. You want to make sure that you're digging out kind of that tertiary level of what's in their mind, other than what's the buzzword or what's the, I'm trying to think of the sound bite, right? Go beyond the sound bite. And when you can do those things to everyone individually, now all of a sudden you're going to have that high level of engagement.
Right.
Which leads to customer success and customer engagement.
Absolutely. Which is why we're in business, right? Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
I just say if you can keep your environment such that everybody truly believes there's no such thing as a stupid question, you're going to get that you're going to get that culture where everybody's asking questions, right? Because you have to learn where they're trying to get to might be 3 steps ahead of what you might consider something they should already know or a stupid question. Help them get there, because it means they're asking questions, they're thinking about it. If they're asking questions, they're engaged. I guess that's really what we're talking about today. So if maybe that's a red warning flag, if you're not getting questions, if people on your team aren't looking for ways to improve things, why can't we do it this way? Could we try this? Maybe that's a warning indicator that you don't have the level of engagement that you think you have.
That's a good point. Rhett?
Yeah, I think I'd echo Mark, because I do this a lot too. And it was something that Mark actually helped train me on earlier on in my manager days, as far as how do I ask my team to help me come up with the best answer without making them feel like I don't have the best answer, type of thing. Like I don't know what I'm doing. We've talked about that in previous episodes, how to do that tactfully and everything.
Right.
I think the first solution is not always the best solution. Totally agree with it. Maybe it's a placeholder solution. You say, we got to get this in place for the next week or two, but I want us to come back and improve upon this because I don't think it's the end solution type of thing. There are situations where that comes up, especially in customer success or delivering products, all of that. I think the second part to this, which I've kind of mentioned before, all of us spend so much time building these great, powerful, diverse teams. Like the point of that is to use that knowledge and to get those different ideas and all of that background experience that they have on a solution that they may have from another company. And if you're not doing this, you're not going to get that. And so you're not getting the full potential out of your team.
No, it's true. And I think it kind of leads into our last one, which is kind of a combination of all these, is making sure everyone contributes, building a culture where everyone feels empowered to contribute. I think that kind of ties into what we've been saying earlier, but you have to work at that. It doesn't just happen. Jeremy, talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh, I wanted to take the contrary side of this one.
Take it away. Go ahead.
You can have a great environment. Everybody's contributing, they're rocking and rolling. If somebody's not pulling their weight, I guarantee you everybody else on that team knows that they're not pulling their weight. This is an area I had to kind of grow into a little bit, because my knee jerk in those situations is to continue to work with and foster and mentor and coach folks up to where they need to be. I laugh about this with Amber. We need to have Amber on as a guest at some point, right? Because Amber has this down. Boy, somebody's not cutting the mustard. She knows it. She's confident in it. She knows when it's time to pull the plug. It's absolutely wonderful. But this is what harkens me back to that. When I'm going too far into trying to pull somebody up to the level they need to be, I have to remind myself that every single person on that team knows that person's not pulling their weight to the same extent that everybody else is. And that can kill a team. Absolutely kill a team. And I've seen that happen over and over again too, where everybody's working their butt off. And maybe you see somebody that you know isn't working their butt off that gets promoted and gets promoted again. And we saw this, well, we saw this in our tenure together with different folks on other teams. It's from a morale perspective, it's disheartening, right? Again, I think kind of keeping these things in mind. Hopefully you've got that environment where everybody contributes, and if they're contributing, they're engaged. Awesome. Fully on board across the, hey, we've done what we said we were going to do. We increased engagement. Be careful at your tolerance level for folks on your team that may not be plugging away at the same level as everybody else.
Oh, I think that's fair. And I think when we talk about everybody contributing, it's from two perspectives, right? I think to your point, making sure they're contributing in the day to day, but also contributing to the conversation. There has to be that engagement at the conversation level too, not just the work level. So I think it's two-pronged. To your point, is you've got to make sure they're doing both, because it does become very apparent, and it may not always be the culture itself. It just may be the employee, and you have to kind of know the difference.
Sure.
What's your thought on that one?
Yeah, it's funny, Jeremy, because you and I were kind of thinking along the same lines, but the everyone contributes. I immediately think of a team that we were on that was an all-star team where we would just, it was a tumultuous time. We had too many customers. It was a great problem to have, but all we would do was solve problems. So a problem would come to our door, we'd all jump in, we'd solve it, type of thing. And if we had to work overtime, we'd work overtime. Everyone jumps in, helps it. And at some point, we had to stop and kind of ask ourselves, like, are we ever going to actually fix this if we just keep solving it? It was almost counterintuitive that everyone was so willing to jump in and help that we were solving problems that should have broke. Like it would have been better if they would have broke. And we've talked about this on previous episodes, but we had to tell all of our employees, like, please stop working overtime. Like, we're telling you not to. You're not getting paid for it. You're just creating a bigger problem where we're understaffing every year because you're putting in 60 hours. But to that point, that's why all these other pillars are so important, because you have this conversation up front where it's, hey, right now everyone's all hands on deck, but it is a 2-week thing. Like, we need to identify that this is a problem that isn't going to be solved by this. It's a band-aid, and having that open communication and trust environment allows you to do that, so that everyone's not scared of getting terminated, and so they're just working OT to solve all those types of things. So yeah, this is an interesting.
No, it's true. And there are times and places where you have to kind of brute force to get through. But if that becomes your norm, and for us, for a while, brute force was our solution, was we just sledgehammered our way through every problem. We didn't set up a culture that allowed for that. It was just reacting to the environment, but it did make it harder to make it open, to hear counter thoughts, because we don't have time to think. Just go, just push through the wall. You keep going. Any minute now we'll be done. And we did that for years. So I think it's a really good point you're bringing. It's very valid.
It's like the company that says, hey, we got our CSAT up to 98%. We had 50,000 support calls this month and we had a 98% CSAT. Nobody bothered to say, well, what on earth can we do to make that not be 50,000 support calls a month,
exactly.
right?
That's right. You're a company of 4 people. Mark, what are your thoughts?
So a couple of parallels, and one I'm going to take a little side road on. The side road is going to be this, really, again, from an employee engagement side, says, is my work, does it have meaning to what I believe in? And is it also contributing to our overall goals? So, for example, a company that sells light bulbs and batteries, right? Pretty mundane, run of the mill, you can get them anywhere, but yet their whole mission was, we can help power people, right? If it's businesses or individuals, giving them light, giving them support when needed, if there is a power outage, with high-end batteries to power generate, things like that. So they're creating a mindset. Another company that maybe does corrugated paper and packaging, right? You say, well, all I do is I'm working for a job and we provide boxes. Well, are we providing it more ecological friendly? Are we able to put different packaging together that now, where it was thrown out, now we can recycle it? So I think that's one way that people can look at just being engaged because, yeah, I do care about the environment. So I like working for a company that cares about the environment. The one example I'll share too is a little name dropping, but I know you're a big football fan, Chris, and I don't mean the European
100%.
football, but at the Gallup at Work Summit, Kristen Krug is the Vice President of Administration for the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. 3 times in the last 5 years. Excellent
Ooh.
organization. Exactly. And being from Denver, pains me to say Kansas City, but for the most part, she shared a great story that when Andy Reid, their head coach that's been there now for 8 years, came on, the first year, he, the team president and general manager, and Kristen has about 100 plus people in her organization. She goes, I have plumbers, I have carpenters, I have people that are doing game day work, I have people that are selling all sorts of stuff, merchandising and tickets and all that. They gave every employee a cog. And the symbolism and the note was, you are a cog on game day. We only have one quarterback. But if everyone's not doing their job, if everyone is not contributing and working together in synchronization, we're not going to win on the field and off the field. And one could say that's why they've won 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years, which is the pinnacle for that particular sport. So when everyone feels like I have a great contribution that I'm making, it doesn't matter if I'm doing implementations or customer support or digital licensing and provisioning, I'm helping our companies succeed, our customers succeed. And to me, that is one of the epitomes of this is how you drive high employee engagement.
That's true. I have to say, just my blink reaction to that is I don't know how I would feel if I was given a cog. Like I get the intent, but I don't know how I would feel about like you're this little piece in the whole thing. I don't know. Maybe that's just my ego talking.
But you're one of 100 pieces that if you're not
Yeah,
working
no, I know.
together.
I think what would be cool is to take that one step further and have everybody put their pieces in a machine that only turns if everybody puts their cogs into it so that you see how they all interconnect. Like take the metaphor all the way through. Totally get the intent and no disrespect to Miss Krug and her team.
They're just cheaping out. They used to get gold watches.
That's right. Now you get a cog. They went to the metal scrappers and found 100 cogs and handed them out. All right. Anybody have anything else they want to say before we wrap it up? Another really great discussion. Any final thoughts, guys?
No, I think that last point in particular is something for that kind of, if you're looking at this at the next level or the hard to see situations. When I brought up that we had such a great team environment that we were our own problem is like something that is incredibly hard to identify. So I think even for those of you who maybe you do have an awesome, amazing team, you've built a culture that everyone's open and honest within yourselves, but at the end of every year, you still don't feel like you're being taken care of or seen or heard. Your team feels burnt out or something. Like maybe look at these and see, maybe it's not that we don't have this environment, but we have this environment and it's creating a problem because the rest of the company doesn't maybe align with it, type of thing. I think that's just kind of a next level pitch for the listeners as far as like, you may be in this environment already and for some reason it's still not quite solving the problem. So I just think it's interesting.
Oh, and I think maybe to tie off with that, I'll share a little final anecdote that I shared with Jeremy recently. We were talking about this as there was a Stanford survey, and forgive me, I'm not going to remember the name of the violinist, but he's a concert violinist. He gets $1,000 a seat for a ticket. When he plays, everybody stops and listens, and they took him and they put him in a New York City subway. And the expectation was, or the theory was, he's going to draw a crowd. He's the best violinist in the world. And after 45 minutes in the subway, 7 people stopped, right? Out of thousands of people walking by. He made $54 in 45 minutes. Only one person recognized him, and that person gave him 20 of the $54. And the takeaway is no matter how talented you are, it got lost in the white noise of the subway. So is it that he's no longer a talented violinist when he's playing in the subway, or is he in the wrong concert hall? And what I would say with all of the things, and to what you just said, Rhett, if you're playing your violin and you're a really good violinist and you're not getting recognized or your company isn't building that culture, maybe it's not that you're playing your violin wrong. Maybe you're playing it in the wrong concert hall, right? So take all of these things that we've talked about and look at the environment you're in, and are there abilities to make changes, or do you need to take your violin to another concert hall? So with that, we'll wrap it up, unless anybody wants to talk about my violin story, which is a great story. But to summarize, instead, I will say this, that by cultivating a culture of psychological safety, encouraging open and honest communication, demonstrating authentic curiosity, empowering employees to see the impact of their work, strength-based organizations unlock extraordinary levels of employee engagement and achieve remarkable results. And just a little plug for my buddy Mark, if you'd ever like to do a strength-based organization study, go to partnerwithbrg.com, right? Partnerwithbrg.com, and he can set you up, because this is what he does and he's really good at it. So anyway, with that, thank you to the team. Thank you, as always, to the listeners for listening to us. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Generational Exchange. As always, we hope that the conversation between these generations has sparked some new ideas and helped you see the business world from fresh perspectives. Please, please, please don't forget to subscribe and listen for more insightful discussions across the generations. And if you have a burning business question or a comment or a topic you would like us to tackle, please send us a note at cmsrconsulting@gmail.com. Otherwise, until next time, as always, from all of us here at the Generational Exchange, thanks for listening and happy learning.